Okay, we're recording. Cool. This is a SIG Testing Breakout. Today is February 4th, and we are talking about GitOps. I shot a link to a document in which I will try to take some notes into the chat. And could somebody quickly, if they have it open, link to the cool stuff? I found it. Cool. So here's a link to some thoughts that Cole put together. Cool. I think it's probably reasonable just to try to start at the top of Cole's doc and just quickly run through these little topics and comment on them. The first thing that he put in here that ended up sending us a bunch of weird events and causing some interesting behavior on our end was a quarantine PR, I think, from an account that got suspended for spam. Ended up sending an incredible amount of these GitHub sync close events. And so I think in general, there's a little bit of leakage of these undocumented things that happen sometimes.
Yeah, we call those we call them spammy users. So when you request information about them via the API, you'll get 404s, and it will look like them and the resources that they've created and stuff like that won't exist. That does leak right now in webhooks and a couple other places. I think they can still trigger them to be sent. So that's definitely an open bug. I can confirm that more or less, and something that we can probably fix in the next few months, I would guess.
Cool, perfect. It's a good thing that you guys are aware of it.
I'll open an issue if I think there's one already open. We've been tracking this for quite some time and see if I can prioritize that.
Cool. So the next item is, and actually I'm looking at the manifestation of this at the moment from our deployment. When we start Tide, and I'm not entirely certain why this is the case only when we start Tide, we trigger some sort of like abuse detection system. And the message we get is this one specifically. Tide is a controller. The way that it works is periodically it'll issue a GraphQL query to grab the state of the world, then it processes it and does a bunch of other actions afterwards. On startup, Tide is doing a little bit more of those queries than usual, and we're actually time boxing the queries. So while it's running, it's only doing GraphQL queries between two times, between the last time it's synced and the current time. When it starts up, it asks for everything that's been updated ever. So for instance, I pasted like a recent query that we had where we're asking basically for every update that's ever happened. So on startup, we hit this abuse detection mechanism every single time. And so we'd like to know if there's something that we could do that would not have that happen. Because I think this doesn't actually end up impacting us too badly because we only end up missing some events that happen during a redeployment. But it would be great if we could not have that happen. And we're not sure.
We've got a few abuse, like we've got, I think it's like about half a dozen. What would be really useful for me is you wouldn't happen to know, like, how does the user query the API? Is it an OAuth app? Does it use a personal access token? Is it a GitHub app? I can probably come back and tell you the exact, which one of the abuse rate limiters it's hitting. We log and track that. Generally speaking, my guess, if you're doing large queries with the GraphQL API, I'm assuming you're not doing 50 concurrent requests at the same time or 100 concurrent requests at the same time. There's probably a CPU time or a search time limiter that just like limits the amount of CPU and limits the amount of search time that you can take. So one thing to do might be to space out and chunk up the time windows a little bit, or if there's multiple queries being involved, to just space them out a little bit more while it's starting up. But I can definitely take a look and at the specific, like the actual specific requests and errors. I just need to see the like like the OAuth ID or the GitHub app ID or however it actually requests the GitHub API.
So I mean, this is actually maybe something we can talk about right afterwards. So we're only using personal access tokens. I think only because of history. I think that was the only thing available to us at the time that we started the project. So a better understanding of what you guys expect from API users would be super cool for that. But yeah, so we're using personal access tokens for all of these, and it makes sense that this specific query, because it asks for every change since the beginning of time, would take a lot of time, or would take a lot of CPU time to actually succeed.
Personal access token is definitely interesting. If you want to, I guess this can follow up async too. I'd be curious what user the pat is under. That's that'll be what's recorded in our logs in the database. I would definitely recommend going for a GitHub app here if possible. GitHub apps are nice. They're first-class actors against the kind of the GitHub system. So you install them on a list of repositories or on a user. And then they kind of exist without needing an actual user to auth against. So if like a user leaves or whatever, the GitHub app stays installed and is attached to that repository. So it kind of allows you to not like, if one user's pat is in a bunch of bots, the rate limit will be collated and stuff like that. It's a much cleaner authentication method and also makes it a lot easier to debug stuff like this. And the added bonus is that every installation of the GitHub application, if you're working in like multiple organizations, has its own rate limiter, which is nice. That can give you kind of that scales with the way that apps work. So that can be good as well, and give you more.
Given that prow is sort of deployed by potentially a bunch of different people, how would you think that? Do you have a recommended way for us to integrate with that? There's not just like one prow deployment, like the CNCF prow is one instance, but like Steve has a different one at Red Hat, and there's probably 10 or 20 of these throughout the various locations.
Oh, interesting. So we do have. I'll have to dig up the documentations because an app, the actual app, there's a few options, right? It depends on, I think, the level of trust. You could have every prow deployment create its own GitHub app. And those are like heavy records. Those belong to a user, similar to an OAuth application. We have a support provider called app manifests, I believe, which are basically a template you can use to machine create a GitHub app. So like the deployment process can be very easy for creating additional GitHub apps if that's what we need. Alternatively, GitHub apps support the primary method of authentication is public-private key. So, and a GitHub app supports multiple keys. The problem is that like every app has access to all of the installations. So if you don't want the prow version or instance A over here to be able to get the repository information for the install for instance C, what you're probably looking at is creating one GitHub app per like trust namespace, more or less. And that can be automated fairly easily. And it's nice also because again, it's one user owns the app, but the app install itself is user independent and exists as a first-class actor. and stuff like that. So if the app leaves a comment, for example, it shows as the app commenting and not the user that it's commenting through. So it's kind of a replacement for machine accounts, and it's got some nice properties inside of it.
Are there downsides to it?
It's definitely, like the getting started story is definitely a little bit more complex. There was a time when, I guess, there are still some limitations as far as what data you can access. Like off the top of my head, I think some search data is a little bit limited. And it's like the mental model is more complex. So what you probably want to do is double check like everything that you're querying is supported by the app and go through the flow once, because it's not as easy as just wrapping a call with a personal access token. You have to you create a GWT token that you use to get a specific token for each installation, and then you use that. So there's definitely a little bit more like work against the API. But it's
say that the actual API service that's available is different and distinct though.
So not every route, I guess I should take a step back. And this is documented. I'm pretty sure it's almost all wrapped up now. There was a time when not every API route that was available for access as a personal access token is available for a GitHub app. An example of that is a GitHub app can't react to a comment because we don't want to give apps first-class support for thumbs upping and thumbs downing an issue. Same thing with like reading notifications. A GitHub app can't read notifications. And so there are some weird limitations where like the actor model doesn't fit in with some of the API routes and some of the data model. It's less of a concern than it was a year ago when that was a pretty heavy restriction. But before you go all in, you'll want to check the documentation. Another big advantage is that the permission system is significantly more fine-grained than it is with personal access tokens. It's much more fine-grained than OAuth scopes. So depending on the security model, again, you can be sure that the app won't be able to access certain things and can access certain things. But that really depends on what all the app is designed to do. So I'll link it in the Zoom chat. But here are the docs on available endpoints in the REST API for GitHub apps. It's a lot of things.
Also works with enterprise GitHub?
Yep. Yeah. The GitHub app support was shipped in a few versions of enterprise. You'll have the normal problems where like some things lag, but at this point there should be quite a bit of parity between GHE and you'll definitely have to work with the app manifest stuff if you want to work in GHE. Like the GitHub app, the first-class database record that exists in github.com doesn't percolate to an enterprise instance. So every enterprise instance you work with, you have to create the GitHub app again, which is an annoying limitation if I'm being frank, and one that I know that team already knows, but we'll make sure that they know.
Okay. So aside from potentially triggering abuse detection mechanisms that are created for users, and aside from actually having to have accounts around, what are the other downsides we should know about, given that all we're ever doing is using personal access tokens for a bunch of different accounts?
In terms of just like the difference between using an app and using a personal access token?
Like, are there other reasons to switch?
If personal access tokens are working for you, personal access tokens will work. Like they have the most basic permission model, which allows for them to be the most powerful, kind of without the least amount of configuration. We find that organizationally, they're the most inflexible because they require that user account, and they don't live in a place like with a GitHub app. You can have a group of owners, and the permission model is much better for groups. I would say though that like the specific problems that you're experiencing here won't necessarily be solved with the GitHub app. I would call it classified as more of an optimization if the workflow works for you. But if you wanted to change the model, if you wanted to have like a single GitHub app that was run by a central source that worked, like across multiple organizations instead of having an instance like federated for every person, the GitHub app model would work perfectly for you. And that would probably reduce the overhead of everyone running their own instance and stuff like that. That's really where I think the advantage is, not necessarily in a small step to still federating it out, but using a GitHub app.
Yeah, I don't think, unfortunately, right now we have enough trust between the different federated instances to actually do that. But it's a cool idea. It's been brought up a couple times in our support channels too.
Yeah, I mean your workflow, like it works. I wouldn't suggest changing it when there are probably bigger fish to fry. But I would be remiss if I didn't bring it up. There is some optimization that can be done.
Okay, so the next two topics are things that I think we brought up in the meeting and potentially you already know about. Transient search indexing failures. I think what's been stated is that you guys know about the indexing issues and it's not currently prioritized because it's happening at such a low rate and only really noticed by users such as ourselves who are doing a lot of searches on those. I think one of the things that we're a little bit confused about too in that case is it's not obvious to us the scope of the indexing issue and like what data may or may not be stale about a pull request. So like we were thinking about different ways to work around. We can detect that a result that we got is stale because we can detect that, for instance, we got a closed pull request and we queried for open ones or something. But workarounds for that would require us to reach out to the API again. We're not really sure if any of those workarounds make sense because we're not sure which parts of the API would be giving us true results or not. So
that's a good question.
What our options are there would be interesting to know.
Yeah, I know very little. Honestly, I know very little about search. Our kind of dealings with the search are basically a thin wrapper over the tools that search provides. So that is definitely a good follow-up to get specific information. I will say that using the API outside of search, like the REST API and the GraphQL API outside of search, will almost always get you the proper non-search results. We do use like database replication, so there's always the possibility of there being slightly stale data, but by and large in normal operation, if you just grab the resource by the pull request ID with the repository or the issue or something like that, you won't get stale search data. You'll get up to date, as you would see on the website, database information that doesn't hit the search cluster at all. So my advice would be if you're kind of ever trying to look and say, okay, what's the most up-to-date information about this? Just grab it from the rest of the GraphQL API without going through search, and you'll get the up-to-date info.
Okay, that's super good to know. The other thing that was in the doc here that we definitely talked about early in the meeting, so we don't need to talk about it a huge amount, is just an API for knowing about webhooks.
Yep. We're scoping that out literally tomorrow, and we'll have. Are there any specific? So just to 30 seconds.
Yeah.
The kind of core requirements that we're thinking about are the ability to see failed webhooks in a GitHub app or in an organizational webhook or in a repository webhook. Probably look at the original payload and/or maybe retry them, and potentially then being able to filter an organizational webhook down by repository, so that when you have an org webhook that's got installed in an org with 1,000 repos, you're not looking at the failures for all 1,000 repos, but you can drill down a little bit. Are there any other requirements or niceties that would be nice in that API on your end that I can pass along as we start to spec this out?
No, that seems reasonable. I mean, I know that you had mentioned too that actually having an API to send a retry would potentially be difficult, and honestly, even just an API to fetch webhooks that have failed would be fine, and their payloads, because then we can simulate the webhook being delivered ourselves.
Cool.
And searching by repo, I think, would be super useful for admins, but as far as the app being able to provide a consistent UX for developers, I think we'd retry every failed webhook anyway, so if we can't filter failed ones, that's not the end of the world either.
Got it. My final question on this is, and this is something I've been asking all of the people who have asked for this, recognizing that webhooks are obviously always going to fail for some reason, whether it's our end, whether it's your end, whether it's the internet, going wrong, would retries completely remove the need for this? Or even if, let's say, we retried 3 times, 5, 15, and 30 seconds after our webhook failed, would you still want to make use of this API, or would that 30 seconds of retrying kind of cover most of the failures that you see?
It's a good question. I think one of the things, I think in most cases, well, I guess there would be a point at which your built-in retry would probably give up and stop wasting time
Right.
if you hit something over and over again. And I think if prow wanted to give a stronger guarantee that we got every webhook, we might try harder. The only other thought where automatic retries would maybe not be exactly what we need. We've been trying to think about the best way to handle outages where our hook recipient goes down.
Right.
And I think at some point, I mean, we've been talking about this for a while. We might build just like a cache, proxy cache that just grabs webhooks and stores them. So that
Yeah.
and I think an automated retry, if there's an outage for 30 minutes, might just give up on a whole bunch of things. So I think automatic retries would solve the vast majority of cases, but we might still end up wanting the API or building some sort of proxy cache anyway.
Cool. Yeah. That's been what I'm thinking as well. You know, what I've been asking customers is basically, if we had retries that, I mean, we wouldn't try for very long, right? It would be difficult to retry for 5 minutes even, because that's a lot of webhooks. Would you still dedicate the engineering resources towards using a failure API if we had a small amount of retries? Usually the answer I've gotten is yes, we would still do that for that outage case, and just to be sure to have like a sweep for failure. But I just kind of want to make sure, because you know, if we build product A and what everybody really wants is product feature B, we're going to build both when we can get away with one. But I'm thinking that failure API is both easier and guarantees kind of a baseline for all of our customers.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I owe you also a follow-up on that specific repo that we've been having trouble with. We can take that offline though. Do some retries and see if we can reproduce a failure or whatever, but that could happen after this.
Okay. Let's see. So having search results truncated in the API means that we do a pretty complicated partitioning using update times in our queries. And I think this is the other half of the abuse detection thing. And so I guess because we're doing the binary searching, we're asking for a small number of changes and we're not hitting the abuse detection. So if we weren't doing that, we'd probably hit it more often.
Probably. So what do you search for? I'm more curious. Is it like a issue label kind of thing, pull requests?
Yeah, so we describe, so we have a controller that tries to merge PRs, and whether APR is eligible to be in the merge pool is described as a search query. And so
okay.
Or searching across an org or orgs for PRs that match a certain label state.
Got it. Is it super complex? I'm kind of wondering if it's reproducible outside of search, or if it's sufficiently complex that there's enough, you know, like real grammar that needs to go through the search system.
That's a good point. I think originally we wanted I think originally the thought was we could only use search, and then the search response would give us the exact list of PRs that we needed to be worried about. Since then, we've changed how that works, and so we're doing a search and then we're filtering afterwards anyway. So we could just stop using search. I think that might.
I love our search team deeply, but for things like this, I think that maybe are exceeding the, shall we say, availability and consistency of our search system. It might make sense to try and use some basic heuristics like label, because like basic search, like if you look for label and some things, sometimes it gets sent to Elasticsearch, sometimes it doesn't. I can offer some advice, but especially using the GraphQL API, it might make sense to overfetch on data and then filtering the application instead of like trying to put it all in the search predicate and then, like you said, having some binary search logic and stuff like that. But again, I'm not sure what the exact criteria are, but that might be a worthwhile optimization. Oh, that's quite the that is quite the search. Maybe that does make sense to use search for then. That's a lot of labels.
Yeah. Okay. Point taken.
Yeah, that'd be a big SQL query. I'll put it that way. I think the query optimizer might not love that.
Okay. Don't let the search team know where to find us.
I won't. I'll make sure I pass the anonymized feedback though. I mean, this is what it's made for. At the end of the day.
So I guess the follow-up to that, which I can anticipate the answer to, an OR operator for labels and milestones.
I'm actually surprised that doesn't exist.
So I think labels. I actually don't know what the exact response is. I believe if you list multiple milestones in a search, you get nothing back because nothing contains multiple milestones.
Right.
So I think we wanted the default to be an OR. But again, this is kind of a moot point depending on how we move forward by using the search API.
Mm-hmm. I can definitely pass, like I said, I mean, I'm so unfamiliar with search, we literally pass the search string, and it's awful because you can type a search string in a GraphQL query and then you're typing a query language in a query language. Wonderful. Computers are great. But all we really do is forward it and then marshal the responses on the way back. But I'm happy to go to the search team if there's anything that I can pass along or ask any questions and stuff like that.
Let us look into using like fetching data and filtering on our end before we start asking for more complex queries. There's a question here, just webhook payloads about events pertaining to pull requests don't contain the status of labels. I believe payloads that have to do with issues do have those labels in there. This is mostly just like API optimization on our end. If we had that
5-minute fix, I can have that done soon. 5-minute fix. That's silly. No more discussion needed.
I like that. Every once in a while, I just put this in here because I'm watching it happen at the moment. Mm-hmm. Every once in a while, we do see like these waves of Git failures against GitHub.com, and I don't know if there's something we should be doing there.
That's interesting.
And we'll see like hundreds of these fail just in like a short, like 5-minute window.
That's very interesting. I would bet. I mean, I'm assuming you're doing quite a few operations per time frame. But that's interesting. I can also take this back. Is it mostly for any one repo, or do you see it across all repositories?
No, when it happens, we see it across every repo at the time period.
Interesting. Awesome. Let me take that back. I'll do some more investigating.
And
that's mostly in the OpenShift org, or is that even outside of that?
No, I believe the CNCF deployment is the same thing. I don't actually have amazing log retention on our end, but I know that the stack driver logs for the CNCF prow are persistent forever, maybe. So we should be able to search across those to get like these clusters.
Awesome. Yeah, if you could give me like some times and repos, that would be awesome. I can definitely take that back.
Cool. And I think, I mean, we're eventually consistent on this one, so I don't think it'll be an issue, but it's just an interesting thing we noticed.
It's good to know. I mean, I would love to get a root cause. If if customers are seeing that on their laptop, especially, that's a really lame UX, and it's not good anywhere. So
I'm not sure I've ever personally seen it outside of our logs, but yeah.
We might, it could be something as simple also as like throttling your authentication credentials or something like that. I would believe that.
Cool. I think those are like all of the super pinpoint topics that I think we've hit upon. The next section Cole had here were just like more broader questions. And I think, let me see if I can pull this up. I remember reading a specific web page and getting a little bit frightened at some point.
Now I'm curious.
Okay, I can't quite find it. Oh, here. Yeah. Okay, perfect. So I'll put this into the chat. So I think bullet point number 2 is fairly terrifying for us. So if it's now documented that like authenticated requests should be made serially, and then if we're making a lot of requests, we should wait at least a second between each request. I think that was not clear to us when we started writing this, and I don't know if this was published at the time, but we're really egregiously breaking both of those bullet points. And so I think at least personally, I would love to know, how do we make sure that like tomorrow when I log in, I don't see that all of my applications are working because we're being rate limited because we're really egregiously breaking those things.
Yeah, good question. I would say that these are more, so you've been hit by a rate limiter, what North Star should you start to orient to? Especially that one, unless say we will rate limit you unless this happens. More specifically, I don't see us starting. I think it's not customer friendly to not allow for some level of concurrency. We recommend people limit their concurrency if ever possible, but we're talking something like 10 to 15 concurrent requests and not 1 to 2. We do have specific, there is a specific abuse rate limiter that does sweep for people making too many concurrent requests. I don't remember the number off the top of my head, and we try not to talk about them, but it's in the double digits. And so, if anything, you'll know when you've hit it, which you are in that one bot, and it's possible that that's what it is, but it's pretty lenient, if I'm being honest.
Okay, so we do actually deploy a proxy cache in front of all of our interactions to GitHub. So I think
cool.
It would be reasonable for us to also throttle there. So if you can give us a target number to throttle to, I think we can implement that.
I will go ahead. Let me look at that. Let me find a good number into the code right now. And I can find a good number in a sec. I would say, you wouldn't happen to measure the level of concurrency that you kind of experience day in and day out these days, would you?
Let me pull up the metrics for this.
We could probably look at the proxy and calculate that, but I don't know that I have it immediately offhand.
Yeah, I pasted the metrics.
Oh, cool. Okay.
That we do.
Oh yeah, cache is very efficient. That's awesome.
Yeah, I think it's because the rest of our code is not.
Hey, that's what the caching layer is for.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, that's computers doing their job right there.
Yeah. So I think everything that we measure is based on trying to make sure that it's efficient for caching tokens. So We can get back to you with how much concurrency we're actually using, but if you have a target number, then we can probably.
Yeah, I mean, I would say 25 would be a good number. If you can shoot for that, I don't know if that'll be higher than lower concurrent requests. The way that it works is it's like a sliding 60-second window. Every time a request comes in, a counter is incremented, and comes out, it's decremented. So if you kind of hit the sliding window the wrong way, you'll end up with funky numbers. So I wouldn't push it right up to the limit. But I think 25 concurrent requests is probably safe. There are other limiters that you will probably hit before that, the CPU time and stuff like that. So concurrency is probably not your biggest enemy, but if you can add a reasonable upper bound and just see how that works out, I think that would be good. Okay,
cool. That sounds good. Yeah, I think we were trying to investigate the GraphQL 502s, and then we looked at this page and we were like, whoa.
Yeah, the 502s are almost certainly, now that I know you're using search, are almost certainly search related, I would bet, search and CPU related. And so I would definitely recommend trying to optimize some of that out of the startup critical path, either by spreading it out into smaller queries over a few minutes if you can afford that, or doing it in the background or something like that.
The GitHub apps, one of the next questions here, quote, rate limit exception for our bots, question mark. See, probably not going to happen. Does the GitHub app mechanism scale with the number of users that are using it or the number of members in the org? I remember there was one mechanism that would scale.
Yes, it does. That's one of the benefits, especially if you find it. Yeah, there's the page. So if you install a GitHub app on an organization instead of on a single repository, so let's say you got a GitHub app and you installed it on the OpenShift org, which would kind of be the equivalent of like your organization webhook. For every user more than 20 users, you get 50 requests an hour, and for every repo above 20 repos, you get another 50 requests an hour, up to 12,500, which is like 2.5x to what your personal access token gets. So if you have a big org and you install the app on there, you can scale your rate limit up, your numeric rate limit up fairly significantly. The abuse limits remain the same, but if you're running into just like too many requests in an hour, which it seems like you're not.
No, especially with the caching, where if we run out of tokens, it's because somebody oopsied somebody.
Which happens all the time. We do that to other people every now and then too. So, but yeah, that's how that scales. We're always trying to kind of tweak that, and the abuse rate limits are the focus of some of our recent ire around like them scaling in a way that's not conducive to the way that people's applications scale. But yeah, if numeric rate limits was your problem, the GitHub app is definitely a good answer.
Okay. Cool. The next question on here is the fastest support channel. And to color this just a little bit, I do know that like if I submit a GitHub support like request thing, and I've done this a couple of times, and I've tried to be like I think Cole mentioned this too. Like sometimes like that channel has a couple hops, skips, and jumps before it actually gets to somebody who's able to respond to it in a more nuanced way that we're looking for. But I guess now, if you guys are, you know, like somewhat available on Slack, I'm not super certain we need to worry about this one.
Yeah, I mean, I can't commit to a personal SLA, but you're in my Slack, and we use Slack at GitHub. So during rough working hours, I will say that our support, if you just email support, that is staffed with technical people in my kind of department in most European to Pacific evening, and they're generally pretty good, especially at helping with like diagnosing and understanding the way our infrastructure works a little bit. And it will bubble up to me. Like when you wrote to support about the webhook issue that we were experiencing, it got to my inbox 2 or 3 hours afterward. So if it's urgent, I would support ticket and then follow up on Slack. And one of 3 things will usually be happening. We'll have no idea. Hopefully not that one. It will be limited to you, or it will be a real thing and we'll say, we're about to status. But I think that's probably the best thing for now. I wish there was a paid support tier kind of thing that we could offer. We do offer that for our enterprise customers. but it's not a very good mismatch. And in the end, what you're trying to do is most likely escalate to me or my team anyway. So I think having a direct line is probably easier. And if it becomes a burden, or if if that stops working out, we can try something else. But that's probably the easiest way for now. It's a common pattern for us too. We have Slack channels with a lot of our bigger API customers, and they ping us when they need stuff, and that tends to work. We have a partner engineering team as well. They're working on staffing that up, but if it becomes something that happens frequently, we can also have a partner engineer kind of chill in Slack, and they're also very good at, their job is to do this kind of stuff. So we can go down that road as well.
Totally, and I think especially if you guys are in Slack and respond like within a couple days or whatever, I think it's fine. Recently, I just know there's been like a couple of these oddities that have happened with like the spammy user where it was just kind of unclear what was actually going on.
No, that's, if you get a 404 accessing, the problem is you can get anyway. Yes, that will definitely happen. There is some strategies that people who use the API will use. Like if you fetch the underlying user in a 404, that means that they're spammy, and that means you can ignore it, but that's another API call. We really should just fix the bug. I probably should prioritize it higher. That's on me.
The last sort of umbrella question that Cole threw in here, and I think he mentioned this too on the group meeting. So you guys are using Kubernetes for your deployments internally. I think one of the focuses for us this year is seeing how broadly applicable prow can be just for orgs in general. And so I think in the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of adoption of prow, mostly clustered around Kubernetes, but like there's a bunch outside. So if you're interested, you can send your webhooks to yourself and then you can
which we do. No, I'll take a peek. I'm not familiar, but I'm happy to take a look. I've never used it before. GitHub has a history of not invented here, and so I'm happy to say that almost everything is custom, and nobody likes that. So definitely pass that along.
Cool. Some architectural notes you put in here. And I think these are mostly just kind of like rough edges to the API that make interacting with it a little bit more work on the client side. So I think in general, when our system is trying to provide a UX for users, we're just trying to respond to the user doing something. And there's like a million different ways that somebody can leave a comment, for instance. And so we do have abstraction layers, like we take the webhooks that are delivered to us and we process them and we have a generic comment event. Whatever. So I think depending on, I'm not really sure, like it might be easier for people to consume webhooks if they're trying to do something similar, if there was that higher level abstraction from GitHub, but at the same time, it's fine as it is. It's just a little bit more extra work on our end. And we have some proposals to try to work with like different social Git hosting sites at the same time, not just GitHub. And so I think like an abstraction layer is probably something we'll have regardless of what exact API product or GitHub is.
Right.
But that's an interesting note. I think another funny comment that we often make about prow is that it really wouldn't exist if the permission system for users on GitHub was more granular. And so I know you mentioned that there's like a much more granular permission system for GitHub apps. Is something like that for users like on the roadmap? Is like being rolled out in the future? Is that not really something you're thinking about?
I can say confidently that we are aware of these problems. I don't know how we're trying to address them. I know, and I was hopeful that we could get you some FaceTime with Devin, we've got a PM dedicated to like the open source and just like how large, specifically a lot of the time, how large projects kind of thrive or don't thrive on GitHub. This has come up a lot. I don't know specifics of what we're doing, but I see like directory-based code ownership and more granular restrictions on things like labels and stuff like that. Absolutely the kind of thing that we just don't do very well. We're very, very much, GitHub's permission system is very, very, very much set up to the repo, both in terms of not being granular enough and both in terms of being too granular with things like labels and stuff like that. I'd love to see us change. I don't have a lot of foresight, but I can also hunt down someone who can kind of chat that through and who would love to chat that through with you.
Totally. Yeah.
We've actually, on the community side, we've actually just recently started connecting with Devin.
Perfect.
So we're kind of forming those bonds at the same time.
That's great. Yeah, she's fantastic, and she's super passionate about this. And I know we really do care about this. Like, there's been some really good blog posts about like the kernel could never use GitHub and just mono repos in general. I've worked at companies that have had mono repos on top of GitHub. It doesn't work that well. And so I'm hopeful that we can make some strides there. And those will obviously all be reflected in the API and stuff like that. But I don't have any specific knowledge. I know there are specific for things like cross repo administration. Even we use like Probot scripts to do like issue sync, label sync, and stuff like that. So even we feel that pain on our end a lot of the time.
Cool. Well, Christoph, I'm glad to hear you guys are in contact. I mean, if any of those things ever make it into GitHub, like we just delete code from our
So this is, yeah, I've been working with my team to kind of retask how we think about some of this, and a lot of what we've been trying to, a lot of what this has come down to is like we've got very smart people who, instead of spending their time creating cool products, projects, and companies, spend their engineering time on making GitHub work for them. And I would just love to cut all of that off, right? I would love for someone to be able to look at GitHub and go, great, works for me. I can go get focused on what I actually want to do, and not get focused on how I do what I actually want to do. So look for more of that, hopefully in the next months and stuff like that, as we figure out what that means.
Yeah, and I mean, for what it's worth, like I think you guys have done a really awesome job of adding features. Like there's a bunch of things that Prow does that GitHub now also does, like setting reviews, like doing like and stuff, which, you know, beforehand was not. And I'm not sure that our communities will be very quick to adapt.
That's what happens, though, right? That's the early adopter, curse as well.
But we do honor, if you leave an approving review, like that approves.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah, I just don't think we'll be able to retrain people. Right?
Yeah, I know the feeling.
I think the last thing that on the architectural notes, so from like an administrative perspective, trying to administer things between repos and across orgs is a little bit cumbersome. So we have created tools that, for instance, like help us ensure that a basic set of labels is available across an org, or that we control like team membership and the
totally
teams have. So if there's anything coming on that front,
Not that I know of. This is the kind of thing that a GitHub app could be useful. You could say something like anywhere that the app is installed with the right permissions, it sets up a base set of labels, it copies team membership over and stuff like that. But yeah, another thing that I think Devin is the right area for feedback, and we'll be very, very honest about the fact that needs to get better. I can't speak for her though, but I hope so, because I think it needs to get better.
One comment here. So conditional requests, which we're using for our caching layer, presumably take as much CPU time as actually making the request, but don't actually cost any tokens, which we're pretty thrilled about. Are there any plans to change that?
That's there for that reason. So they actually are lighter because what we don't have to do is build the whole request body up, which our APIs are pretty fat a lot of the time and take a lot of like linked resources and stuff like that. So they are easier, and it's just like it's something that we kind of have to do. Like imagine if we changed this behavior, you would spend a lot of your time optimizing your API usage, and that's not a good use of your time. So not going away, that's documented. And I don't see that changing. And yeah, it's easier, and that's the kind of thing I think where we would, instead of removing it, we would look to optimize it further instead of do away with it and kind of make you have to go back on that and not be able to use the caching. So you're doing that right. If you wanted to know how to kind of make use of our system the best, that's absolutely the first thing that we tell people: e-tags and caching, because that's lighter weight, it doesn't count against the rate limit, it's relatively easy, and it just works, more or less.
Yeah, cool. No, we do love them.
Well, Will that also count towards concurrency limit? Like,
Yeah, it does.
okay, so when you were saying the 20, whatever, concurrency of 25, that includes cached requests?
Yeah, so the ETAG or the conditional request ahead request will not count against your volumetric rate limit for the hour, but they will count as requests in terms of concurrency and stuff like that.
And I think all of those get put through the same place anyway, so we should be able to funnel them to some degree.
Cool. Yeah. And like a lot of the conditional requests are super low on like CPU time and stuff like that, so it's very difficult to have them hit some of the abuse limiters, but the concurrency one specifically is still possible. Should be good to make sure you avoid.
Cool.
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure the way that our proxy works is we will essentially make a ETAG request for every GET request, and then essentially return the cached response.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That makes sense.
It hasn't changed.
That's
so
what
that way we don't have to worry about. We're always getting the update value, but we'll just store the cache value.
Yeah. So
the cache, I guess.
What the cache is doing is it's coalescing similar requests at the same time, and it's doing that.
Oh, cool. That's awesome. Yeah. No, I would. That sounds perfect. And if you can just apply like a high-level concurrency control there,
right.
And it doesn't even. I mean, it almost doesn't even have to be like super strict, but just to track it and to kind of see where you're trending would be good. And then if it ends up being, like, oh, we burst to 500 concurrent requests or whatever, that's when adding some back off and stuff like that would be good. I don't know how timeouts work and stuff like that, but yeah, that would be probably where I would start, just in terms of making sure you're good citizens. That and the GraphQL search stuff as well, which I'm happy to help. I got a DM with the user that those run against, so I can go look up some info about that and see what that's hitting as well.
Cool. Cole has a list of things that we love in his doc, which I'm excited to talk about because these are awesome. I think webhooks in general, I mean, the system we had before was just like, it was a poll that would just grab an enormous volume of data and try to cache it and munge it. And being reactionary is awesome. Getting as much data in every webhook as we do is awesome. Like, the workflow makes a lot of sense. So yeah,
That's good.
Super
Yeah, we just want to make them better, and that's one of our big initiatives these next few months will be to do that. So the infrastructure-wise, I can definitely commit to making sure that works kind of as well as you would expect.
Yeah, labels and milestones. I know OpenShift and Cube, like, we use them all the time. There's a lot of automation that can be done around them. The support they have in the UI is great. Yeah, I think we're very happy about everything there. And to be honest, too, to some extent, we do end up keeping our app stateless by storing our state in your MySQL. So, thanks.
Yeah, this is not to interrupt. This is actually something that like a lot of people do, and in the past we've explored but never quite done, like a first class, like, call it a key value store on a lot of the big objects, like a repo key value store, an issue key value store, PR key value store, because like we don't really mind. It keeps you on GitHub. It keeps you tied to GitHub, which is nice. And it's also just like people do comments instead. It'd be much better if there was a first class primitive. So I'm actually happy to hear that that works, and we can probably make that better. Although if you work on multiple providers, they'll have to copy that.
Right. I think right now we store state in issues. We store state, in labels, and we do store state in comments as well.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. The markdown suggestion blocks are awesome.
Yeah, I use that all the time. That would be unusable without them.
Right.
I think. Cool. So just to recap on my end, I've got about 2 or 3 takeaways. Going to take a look at the spammy or blocked user still sending webhooks. See if we can reprioritize that, or just take a look at how much effort that is. I also want to look at the specific personal access token users and see what the abuse rate limiting problems are, to make sure I gave good advice and just kind of follow up. I've also got a pull request webhooks and labels, that quick 5-minute fix. And then I will wait for your advice on kind of how you use the search API. I can either connect you with that team, or we can kind of figure out what the next steps are, or if you end up not having to use the search API, chat through how some of that might work in the GraphQL and the REST API. Have I missed anything? I see a thumbs up.
The two takeaways on my end, I think, are if we can get like a more comprehensive set of data to give to you guys on these git clone timeouts, and with Christoph just following up to engage with that PM on things that we can go through.
Anything about dropped webhooks, or are we?
Good one. I owe you you seem to be having a problem with a specific repo and drop webhooks. I'm going to go look through and find some of those and see if I can retry them and see if it's a transient issue or if there's some deeper problem.
Yeah, and I did poke around last week. I think one of the pieces of our routing layer specifically was having CPU issues. We upgraded that, so I think some part of our higher error level was because of that.
Cool. That's the problem with webhooks. That's the one thing. There's such a great pattern. When they first came out, I don't think we had some of the primitives. My dream world would be something a little bit more durable because they get lost so easily. Even with retries, you get ordering issues and my goodness. But yeah, I'll take a look and look through failures as well. I was seeing a specific error with that one repo that might be like, we often see it when code hits an unhandled exception and then just drops the connection and doesn't return any data. So I can look through that again and I can get some more info.
Yeah, and actually, now that I'm thinking about it, what if there was a retry API on those webhooks? It would be interesting to know what sort of guarantees that would give for ordering.
None.
So
which is the problem.
About like how to, or if you guys are doing retries by yourselves and we're not asking for them through an API, that would honor any ordering.
Yeah, ordering is tough. We can talk more about that for sure, but that's one of the reasons that I would rather present our version of ordering to you and let you kind of disseminate that how you wish instead of, I think, trying to guess at what the customer wants, because they're probably very different depending on the customer.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Cool. Anything else? I mean, I want to keep this line of communication open. I mean, I'm in Slack and stuff like that, so just ping me if anything comes up.
Yeah. That's all I've got. If anybody else on the call has questions, comments, concerns.
I don't know if anyone's based in the Seattle area, but don't go outside if you are. It's pandemonium out there. 4 inches of snow and the world ends.
Quite a mess out there. Cool.
Awesome.
I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, of course. I'll be around, and I'll follow up on these as soon as I can.
Yeah. Awesome.
Have a good one.
Thanks, everyone.